You're grinding every day. Long hours, no backup, no accountability. That ends now. The Empower Solopreneur Mastermind gives you one simple advantage: a weekly power session that turns isolation into domination. Every Friday morning on Zoom, you'll get real coaching and real feedback to make real moves. Join a group of driven professionals in a program designed for solopreneurs and people working at home. Stop getting stuck. Start scaling. Seats are limited. Lock in yours today at modernobserver.com/empower-mastermind.
Hello, and welcome to the Success Showcase, the podcast that helps you succeed in your business, life, and career. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin, with the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. How you doing this week, Chip?
I'm doing great, Eric. How about you?
Doing all right. You know, it's been a crazy few weeks. Weird weather across the country. The flu is rampant all over. People are sick. It's really been a rough winter so far this year. And I don't think we've had one like this in a long, long time.
No, that's what I heard. I mean, last week we were talking about how cold it was and everything else, and we still haven't gotten above freezing since our snowstorm 2 Sundays ago. But that's going to happen tomorrow. And last week I had a fun adventure because up here, my house doesn't get any sun in the back, and we started having a little bit of a leak, and it started to be a little more. And I had to have some people come over and actually shovel off my back roof because there were ice dams forming up there, and that hasn't happened like it has now in about 20 years also. So it has not been good, but the good news is it's supposed to be getting into the 30s tomorrow for the foreseeable future. So we're next week we'll probably be swimming in all the melting water. I'm just kidding, but.
Yeah, I know a number of people who've had problems with ice dams all over. But I think one thing we have to take a look at is the fact that, you know, we always have to go through winter, and it means spring is coming. You know, the groundhog last week said, 6 more weeks of winter. And, if he hadn't seen his shadow, it'd mean winter would only last another 6 weeks. So, it's...
Yeah. So, but anyway,
and
in 6 months we'll be complaining about the heat.
Right, and of course, we're the vast numbers of folks around the country were focused on the Super Bowl yesterday. My focus was Wednesday, pitchers and catchers report for spring training. So spring's just around the corner.
Yep, that's always great too. Love baseball. Baseball was popular before football was, and I remember when it transitioned. But I grew up with the Vince Lombardi Packers, so I was a big football fan since the early 60s. So,
yeah, I was growing up in the era of Joe Namath and the Jets, and grew up a Jets fan, which in recent years has been no way to live. But it is what it is.
Yep. No, that was their first and last Super Bowl was 1969. I remember that like it was yesterday, and it's really fun kind of reminiscing about all these stories about past weather events and sports and all that other kind of stuff. And I think we got something to talk about like that today.
We do. We're going to talk about telling stories and how you can get ahead in your business, making a point with the art and science of storytelling. And it really is important because stories have a way of moving people emotionally that sheer data does not have. Data can prove a point, but it's not going to change most people's minds. Humans make choices emotionally. And if you're going to reach somebody on an emotional level, you need to be able to tell them a story.
Yeah, absolutely. And the bottom line is, if you're talking to an audience and doing presentations and so on and so forth, instead of just being the expert in your field or whatever, if they see you as a real human being, that's so important. And so, I mean, storytelling is fantastic. Obviously, for doing presentations, it's fantastic. If you're leading a company, we talk a lot about good management techniques and whatever. And if you as a manager can talk about your stories to your employees as you're growing up, and obviously the Patriots lost yesterday, but Mike Vrabel used to play for him. And he's got a very young team, the youngest team ever to go to the Super Bowl. And they all talk about how he's just been so hands-on, telling the stories and leading them through basically by example and so on and so forth. And so whether it's in life, whether it's in presentations, and whether it's just how you handle yourself, the more authentic you are, the more people are going to relate to you, because everybody, when it comes down to it, is just a human being, no matter what they do. And a lot of people have feelings of insecurities and this and that, whatever. So the more vulnerable you make yourself look, as far as talking about your ups and downs in life, leading into where you are now, it's so important, because we all have a wonderful story to tell.
That's so true. And of course, you can turn anything into a story. And it is a key part of sales and promotion that you are able to tell these stories. But it's not just about making things into a story. It's how you do it. Because the fact of the matter is, most people, out of sheer humanity, quite frankly, it's almost ingrained into us, make ourselves the hero of our own story. And I'm sure you've heard stories like this, where someone's talking about how they won the big game back in high school, or some great accomplishment that they made, and they are the hero of their own story. But those aren't the stories that influence people. They can inspire, but it's the stories of overcoming, the stories about challenges that really change people's minds, that really hit them where they live. And in terms of business and sales, you actually want to avoid making yourself the hero of the story. Because especially if you're talking to a potential customer, your customer needs to be the hero of your story. You actually need to be the guide. And great stories always have guides. The original Star Wars trilogy, Luke Skywalker is the hero of the story, but Yoda and Ben Kenobi are the guides. The hero never actually accomplishes anything without having a guide. And that's where, when you're telling a story about your company, you want to position yourself as a guide. Make the customer the hero of the story. They're the one facing the challenge. They're the one that has to overcome. You're simply the one providing the guidance. You're the one getting them where they need to go. In StoryBrand, which is a fantastic program, last year they came out with version 2.0 of the book StoryBrand. But they talk about this in terms of the James Bond movies. If you're building up your business, you want your potential customer to be James Bond. You want to position yourself as Q, providing all of the materials and all the information the hero needs to get what they want to accomplish done. And for a lot of us, this is a hard transition, because we're used to trying to make ourselves the hero. But you want to take a step back. Talk about challenges, but talk about other people's challenges, not just your own.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you need to do when you're interacting with people, period, whether it's potential customers or anybody there, just put yourself in their shoes. It's so important. I mean, we always talk about networking and business and so on and so forth. And we talk about name badges and networking meetings where everybody's name badge really says WIIFM, what's in it for me? And whenever you're dealing with anybody out there, they're going to have their insecurities and this and that, whatever, but you have to cater to what they need. And a lot of people just need to be appreciated, ask questions, make feel welcome, and so on and so forth. And that's what's so important. I mean, Mike Vrabel of the Patriots, he sat down one-on-one with all the players and found out all about them, his players. And yet he's the guy that's running things. And when he has to be a hard A, he can be that because he's coming at him from that standpoint. So, I mean, if you can go out there, and we talk about just leading with kindness and gratitude towards people and trying to help them out, asking questions and that type of thing, that's so important. So, I mean, in telling your stories, and so if you can integrate that into that and get comments from people and connect with them, I mean, one of the things that you can do to connect to emotions is shared experiences that you've gone through in life. I mean, one of the big questions is, when a particular event happened, where were you? So, I mean, we just went through a snowstorm here. I remember the blizzard of 78. And I remember 10, 12 years ago, we had like a foot and a half of snow and that kind of stuff. Where were you on 9/11? Where were you in other places? And we have so many different things that we can connect with people with them. And just by sharing experiences and basically affection and love with them as far as that goes, just being there for them and talking to them, and most importantly, opening up your ears to listen. Because one of the most important things you can do when you're doing presentations and so on and so forth is get your audience involved with that. I mean, obviously, I like to do like little slides that ask questions to have the audience participate in, and then we just chime that in and work on these things together. So the more you can do that in your presentations, getting the audience involved instead of just preaching to them, that's one of the best things you can do during your presentations. And I know you do a lot of that yourself, so.
Yeah, and finding that common ground, it's not as hard as people think. I mean, there are certain events, depending on your generation, that you can say, where were you during? For a lot of folks, it was, where were you when you found out that Pearl Harbor had been hit? Where were you what were you doing when you found out John F. Kennedy was killed? When Martin Luther King was killed? Where were you when the Challenger shuttle exploded? What were you doing on 9/11? What were you doing during COVID? There's always major events that, for the most part, don't evoke political opinion, but evoke memories of what they were doing. And that's what you want to tap into. You want to tap into people's emotions, their memories, their experiences, and tell stories that are going to connect with those. You mentioned name tags. I was at an event a while back where they gave us all name tags, but we were not supposed to write our name on them. Every name tag had a question, and we had to answer the question on the name tag, which immediately started a conversation with folks you didn't know, because they wanted to know what made you write that on your name tag. And I remember very clearly the name tag I had gotten was, if I had $1 million. And I finished that with, I would buy you a house, which only one person in the room got that those were the lyrics to a Bare Naked Ladies song.
Okay, that just blew over my head too.
Right, yeah, it's, but it started a conversation. It's like, well, why did you think that? It's like, because that song, when I heard that phrase, that song was the first thing that popped into my head. And it opens up a conversation that you would not ordinarily have, because from there we would talk about music and different experiences, what kinds of music you like. And it opened up experiences that we wouldn't have otherwise shared. So it was a great idea for the organizers to do this.
Oh yeah. And I'm deviating a little bit from storytelling, but as far as interacting with people, I mean, one of my most fun exercises, which I think we did with one of our meetings too, was something that was called networking bingo. And what networking bingo is you have a bingo card, and in each block is something, a trait. And it could be don't like pizza, done this, done that, and whatever. And what you have to do is you have to walk around the room and write somebody's name in for each box to get bingo and fill up your card. So it forces you to go to talk to people, and it's a whole lot of fun. It's an icebreaker, and it's just so neat to be doing that. But the more that you can do things like that, get really creative with what you're doing. And if you're doing this in the workplace and so on and so forth, and you're going through a training or something like that, and maybe you have a new crew or a whole bunch of people, throwing an activity like that, it just loosens the ice for everybody, no matter where people are, whether they're really quiet or they're outgoing, so on and so forth. If they're doing the same thing together like that, it's just a great way to get people together. So, I mean, one of the neat things in storytelling is just getting a little bit creative to make your story interesting. And it's just so neat to do that kind of thing. And obviously people, again, they like to see people in their real element rather than just being preached at.
Yeah, preaching almost never convinces anybody of anything. It tells them that this is what you believe, but it doesn't engage them. Preaching is essentially talking at somebody rather than talking with them. But when you tell a story, it has an impact. How many lessons did you learn as a child because you read Aesop's fables or the Bible? Most Bible studies, most Bible stories, the whole point of the story is not this is what happened. It's a lesson to be learned. And people absorb those lessons more because they're told in story form. We remember, it's one of the reasons that so many people remember television shows, remember books they read, because the stories impact them. And stories are one of the few forms of communication that truly does have that impact. It's, as I said, it's about making that emotional connection. And there's nothing emotional about data. Now, you may be able to convince somebody of something using data. And quite frankly, really good stories do rely on factual information that can be verified when you're trying to convince somebody of something. But giving somebody a statistic is never going to have the same impact as telling a story. We've all heard about the horrors of the killing fields. And if I were to tell you the statistics, you'd go, oh, that's terrible. But I happen to know two people that actually escaped the killing fields. And when they tell their stories of what they went through and how they escaped, that's an impact. That there's no doubt that the statistic is horrifying, but the stories really bring it home.
Yeah, absolutely. Being authentic is so important. Just being your true self, and people really want to hear that. So people have a sensitive radar when it comes to those trying to manipulate or take advantage of the situation. Nobody wants to feel that they're not in charge of their own emotions. So emotions, that's what you're playing on.
Yep.
I mean, we are people of emotion, and we all are still children too. And the bottom line is one of the reasons that we still enjoy listening to stories as adults is because we always have as a kid. So the more that you can make your stories like that, basically they can create other worlds, emotions, ideas, make every day seem incredible. They can teach us things like empathy and loving care. They make us laugh, cry, jump up and down, and so on and so forth. And there's so many different ways you can do that. And when you are telling a story and you're connecting with people on maybe true events that have happened to you in your life or things that you've shared with other people. It's just so important to do that, because the bottom line is people are creatures, they're social creatures. And we need to share these things with each other, and to laugh with each other, and to cry with each other, and to celebrate each other, to have pain with each other. Those different things, they're so important. And so the more that people see that in you and everybody else around that, it's just so important to be doing that. And that's the power of it.
Yeah, and when you're telling a story, you do need to be authentic. Authenticity is not just powerful, but it's crucial. A recent study was actually done on people that follow social media influencers and who they follow and why they follow them. And what they found was the folks following them didn't care how often they posted, didn't even really care what they were talking about. It was the fact that they felt they were being authentic. They could post once every couple of weeks and still have followers because they were making that connection. And in most of those cases, they were telling stories about themselves, about what happened to them, but it was all about building that connection through stories and telling folks, this is what went on, this is what I saw, this is what I did, and whatever it is. I mean, stories don't have to be complicated. They can be very simple, but you need to make them engaging. Nobody wants to hear a story about what you had for breakfast.
Not really. So, authenticity. And the bottom line is people think of them as having radars or little antennae in their heads. They're very sensitive to when it comes to interacting with people. And they can know right away whether you're trying to manipulate them, whether it's in it for myself doing the presentation, or if you're genuinely interested in engaging them and helping them out. I mean, people, you better understand that they are all pretty much in tune as to what's going on, whether they're quiet or whether they're outgoing and so on. So authenticity is so key. And if you can't talk from authenticity, you probably shouldn't be doing presentations in the first place.
Very true. And there's certain things that every story needs. And this comes right out of, English 101. When you were in school, you were taught these elements, but it's true not just when writing fiction, but when you're telling a story in a sales presentation, in any kind of presentation. You need to have characters, and those characters need to be identifiable. People need to feel that they understand what those characters are going through. It needs to have a plot. This is where so many people fall short when they're telling a story, is they're telling something that, something that somebody felt or something that somebody did, but there's no progression of plot. There actually has to be a series of events that occur to get somebody from point A in the story to point B. There also has to be a setting that people can identify with. This can be a workplace. It can be an exotic land. It can be your bedroom, wherever it is. But you have to include these details to make the picture in the listener's mind as vivid as possible. And when you're telling stories, you should remember that people have 5 senses. And the more of those senses you can engage, describing what people saw, what they heard, what they smelled, tasted, touched, the more of those details you can put in, the more likely you are to hit on something that resonates with the listener. I see this all the time now on television and in movies, where they're focused so much on visual stimulation that they completely forget about the audio. So what happens? Well, you'll see a scene with big explosions, but there's dialogue going on that you can't actually hear because the explosions overwhelm them. And the dialogue is what's moving forward the story, not the explosions. So you have to use all of the tools in your toolkit to make your story relatable and engaging, because that's how you make that connection. If you can't engage, you're not going to get the emotional response you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely not. And you're also, people aren't going to remember what you said either. Period.
Yes.
I mean, if you're engaging the audience, if you're interested in so on and so forth, people are going to listen. If not, they're just, okay, I have to be here for an hour to listen to this speech, and they're not going to take anything away. So, and if you're going into something, you probably realize that there are going to be people of both types in there. If you can figure out something very interesting to say during your story, that's a great way to engage people. I mean, it's really neat to start something with something powerful that relates to them and is authentic to them. And once you can catch them right off the bat, then all of a sudden you have them going. I know you have some tools that you've used over the years that have helped you out to do that a whole lot. But it's just so important. I mean, make it interesting. People love to be entertained, and if you're going through a corporate event and so on and so forth, probably some of the best talks you've ever heard start with humor or this or that or whatever. It's totally off subject. And then once you get into that, you have people who are now your friends and so on listening to you just because they like to listen to you talk rather than what you have to say.
Yes, getting somebody's attention right off the bat is very important. And a story can do that. Humor can do that. I very often start off talks with a humorous, comment. The last conference that I spoke at, I actually started my talk with a ghost story, actually a true ghost story, which got people's attention. Like, what? Now, what did the ghost story have to do with the talk? Well, the conference was about grief. So having lost somebody was, the hook to the story. But the fact that I told it as a ghost story got people's attention. It's like, wait a minute, what? They had to stop and be quiet for a moment and focus on what was being said before we got into the meat of the presentation. And that is the power of telling stories. And it's always better when there's a twist to the story, something they didn't see coming right before the end that really grabs their attention. So at this point, we are at the end of this week's story. So, Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway for our listeners?
Yep. It's really all about connection. It's about connecting with people's emotions, with what they're going through, ups and downs, and just making yourself real. Basically, at its core, stories, they seek to establish connections with the audience. They play upon people's emotions. And what they do is they just share the fact that we're all human and we're going through different things. And people are interested in hearing how different things have happened because we all go through those. So it's so important to just be your authentic self. Yes, have a great message. Yes, have a fantastic start. But most important, you just have to be totally genuine and just let it go from there. All you have to offer is your true self. And it's all about them, your audience, when you're doing your presentation. It's not about you. And your true self really comes from giving.
Very true. I think for me, the big takeaway is the power that a story has to connect with folks, to influence. And I mean, let's face it, we are surrounded by noise. Online, news, social media, gossip. We are inundated with noise. And how can you get your message across past all of this noise so that somebody's not just going to pay attention to what you're saying, but remember it. And that's the power of telling a story. A story can cut through the noise like nothing else does because it's grabbing their attention, it's making them curious, it's connecting with their emotions. And all of that is what breaks through and makes it memorable. And let's face it, if what you're saying isn't memorable, in the long run, it's not going to matter because people will forget as soon as they walk away. So craft your stories, make them important, make them impactful, and use those stories to get your point across, not just in grand presentations, but in a sales conversation. When you're trying to make a point with a friend, tell the story, because that's how you'll make that point. That's how you'll make that impact. And that's how it hits home with a connection. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch every episode at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcast app, YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.